get ready to thrive loud with Lou Diamond.
Hey, Thrive Loud listeners, Lou Diamond here. Hope you had an amazing summer. And as the month of August winds down, for many college students, classes have begun. I wanted to jump back to an interview I had last year with Lee Humphreys, a communications professor at Cornell University and the author of The Qualified Self, which is a look at social media and the cataloging of everyday life. In this outtake from our original interview, Lee shares with me how our behaviors of microblogging go way back in time. So in this little outtake, you'll get a little history lesson and learn that some of the social media technologies we're using now have actually been around for a long time. So enjoy this Thrive Loud minisode with Lee Humphreys. I want to talk a little bit about your work with your upcoming book, and let's talk about how that came to be and what it's all about.
Yeah, so this book, it started out around 2008. I started studying this thing called Twitter. And it actually
We're familiar with it.
Probably started a little bit before that. So I started studying this thing called Twitter because before that I had been studying location-based social networking. So at the time it was called Dodgeball. Now it's Foursquare. So it's why people would share their locations through their mobile devices. And it was this very weird thing about why would anyone do that? And then Twitter seemed to be the company that was taking over that space. So it was sending short messages on your mobile phone. And when I started studying it, it was at the time, I don't know if anyone remembers, but at the time it was considered a microblog.
Yeah, that's
right.
So
I started doing a lot of research around blogging. And if you do research on blogging, it leads you into diaries. And if you go back far enough, you can learn a lot about the similarities between Twitter and 17th and 18th and 19th century diaries.
Really?
Yes.
Do you think they were counting that many characters or that limited amount at that point?
So around 1850 or so, we see paper production advances. So that journals got much smaller. And what they called them were pocket diaries.
Okay.
And pocket diaries were, of course, you could fit them in your pocket or in your waistband if you were a woman. And what that meant was that they were mobile.
Right.
And of course, they didn't use that term then, but we now understand. So throughout your day, you could jot something down. The other really important aspect about diaries during the 19th century, late 18th century, early 19th century, is that they were shared.
Okay, so really, wait, that's where I was going with it, that back then people actually didn't keep them to themselves. They would say, here, read my diary.
That was a trend much later, toward the end of the 19th century. And before that, particularly if you look at women's diaries, they were much more social, both in the content as well as the practice. So you would write, Mr. Smith came to visit, went to church, planted corn, baby born, And so it became that these journals were a sort of social history, if you would, of the events of the day. And when people would come to visit, you would sit down and look through your journal together, or you might send them to distant relatives.
So you'd actually, I'm fascinated by this alone. Okay, so back in the day, I guess because I've always thought the word diary was something personal and private that people kept to themselves, and this was more of a way of sharing it. How would they share it? Mailing it? Sending it?
Well, yeah, so it depends. So you would have people who would come to visit, and you'd sit down to, and go through it together. Kind of like, I don't know if you have any scrapbookers out there, but scrapbookers will share them, and you'll go visit, and you'll sit down together, and you'll go through the scrapbook together. My mother-in-law's a scrapbooker. So sometimes people would come visit. Sometimes you would put them in the mail. It was actually much easier. So it was very common for young women when they got married and moved away from their parents to keep a diary and then send their diary home rather than just sending letters every week. You could just get it. It was just a quick way to say, this is what's going on in my life.
So now you started off at that point, and that was when Twitter in the early stages was this microblog. And obviously Twitter evolved.
It has, yes. So, the interesting thing is if you look at the content of tweets, which we did, we went through and systematically analyzed a sample of random tweets. A lot of the content out there is actually still, I just read this, I just saw this, I'm super excited about this, I was just here, we just did this. etc. And so a lot of the content actually still is people sharing activities, what's going on, what they're doing, how they think about it. And it's only the super popular ones, of course, that end up getting retweeted a lot and shared and circulated, etc. But the idea of people chronicling or keeping track of what they're doing and telling other people about it is not a new phenomenon.
You've been listening to Thrive Loud with your host, Lou Diamond. Make sure to subscribe on iTunes, Overcast, or wherever you get your podcasts. And follow us on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram at Thrive Loud. Or find us on the web at thriveloud.com.